Okay, I think we're all set. Well, good morning. My name's Colin McLeod, and I hope I'm in the right lecture theatre. This is marketing management. So, if you're here and it's not marketing management, I'm in the wrong lecture theatre, or you're in the wrong lecture theatre. Now, how many of you have studied marketing before? Ah, good. Fresh students. Well, it's a hot day. We all know we should be down the beach wearing shorts and T-shirts and all those sorts of things. So we can't go down the beach, but we'll see if we can make it interesting and a bit of fun. So I've got some administrative stuff that I need to go through, but I want to just start by having you... I know it's terrible, isn't it? 7th of January, I'm going to make you think about studying already. This is what we're going to do in this course. I can tell you in 5 minutes what it's going to take us 36 hours to learn. Most organisations, if they were to look at their annual revenue, let's assume for a moment that it's a business that in 2012 had $100 in revenue. And that $100 came from 10 customers, average price equals $10, obviously. Now, in 2013, this organisation has forecast that they're going to grow their revenue by 10%. Now, there's lots of reasons why organisations think that their revenue will grow. Low interest rates, in Australia, for example, we have low unemployment, recovery from the global financial crisis, competitors falling out of the market, new products coming along. All those sorts of things are the typical reasons that individual companies will tell you that their revenue is going to grow. But every company that says that their revenue is going to change makes at least one identical assumption. And the assumption that they make is this. They make the assumption that in the future, consumers will behave differently to the way they did in the past. Because last year, this company had 10 customers that paid $10. This year, they might have 10 customers that pay $11. They might have 11 customers that pay $10. They might have 110 customers that pay $1. Doesn't matter. But you'll notice that under every one of those assumptions, customers are doing something differently in 2013 to what they did in 2012. Now, the interesting thing for most companies, and those who had a chance to look, I work as a professional. I work here a couple of days a week, but my career is as a professional director. I sit on the board of a listed biotech company, a financial services and accounting company, an IT company, a major catering company. So quite a diversity of interests. But I've very rarely heard people, when they talk about the future and how they're going to hit their revenue, talk about the customer and why the customer would behave differently. Now, so that gets us back to this sort of fundamental question. Why would you behave differently in 2013 to the way in which you behaved in 2012? Well, marketing is the answer to that question. You think about your own behaviour. You used to be a PC lover, now you love your Mac. You used to go to one dentist, now you go to a different dentist. You used to drink Coke, now you drink Pepsi. That's very unusual. All those sorts of things. Why do people change their behaviour? Well, what we think about from a marketing point of view is how do we understand that behaviour and how do we influence that behaviour, because it's pretty clear that that is the underlying assumption being made here, that people will act differently in the future to what they will in the past. And when I sit at directors' meetings and you see future forecasts that, no one ever forecasts that revenue is going to go down, they all forecast revenue is going to go up. You say, why would customers behave differently in the future to the way they have in the past? And that's really what marketing is about, trying to understand that. So let me ask you a question. It's 9:15, first day back at uni. I'm going to ask you a question already. Let's assume, for example, that in this case, we found out that to increase their revenue, this organisation has to improve their customer service. How do you improve customer service? Well, typically you train people differently. You reward them differently. You give them different skills, you give them different incentives. It's typically how you improve customer service. Is the marketing department responsible for training people or working out incentive programs or performance management systems? Who does that in most companies? HR. So does that mean that HR has a role in marketing? Because we're going to deliver value to these customers through better service. But marketing doesn't actually do that. The marketing department doesn't train people. It doesn't provide their incentive programs. It doesn't do performance management. So in this case, the HR function has something to do with improving the offer to customers, what we actually market to customers. So we're going to spend a bit of time, this is just a very gentle introduction to this idea about organisations are all involved in marketing whether they think about it or not. Because if you think about an organisation, if an organisation has revenue, where does that revenue come from? Sorry? It sells, yeah. It comes from customers. So everything you do about, that you talk about in relation to revenue in organisations makes some assumptions about customers. So marketing is something that organisations do. So we're going to spend some time talking about that a bit more this morning. Let me do some of the... we better do some of the administration stuff just to make sure we're all on the same page here. Mood lighting. Let me just find the... we don't want it too hot. We want enough light to read, but not enough light to make us hot. And we want the... This is just my little sort of joke to myself. This is how a lot of people think about marketing. They think that marketing is often about presenting people with bad information and wrong information. We can't compete on price, we can't compete on quality, features or service, which leaves fraud. We'd like you to call fraud marketing, for anyone who likes Dilbert cartoons, which is typically about how a lot of people think about marketing, that, you know, the role of marketing is to actually sort of fool people into thinking things. As you'll find out during this course, you don't need to fool consumers much. They're pretty good at fooling themselves. How many people here think they can tell the difference between the taste of Coke and the taste of Pepsi? Okay. Only one person? Anyone else? How many people here would only drink Coke or Pepsi? Like if you went to a store and you were a Coke drinker, they had no Coke, but they had Pepsi, you wouldn't buy Pepsi. Okay. How many people the other way around would only drink Pepsi, not Coke? Don't care whether it's Pepsi Max or whatever it might be. 50 years of taste tests tell us that people can't tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi. Now, Coca-Cola is the world's single most valuable brand. Now, that's not to say that some people can't. It's to say that most people who think they can can't. Now, if Coke go out and promote themselves as having a different taste, is that fraudulent? Well, we'll come back to that in about halfway through next Monday. So, we'll talk a lot about Coke and marketing. Okay, so this is stuff you already know. The fact that you're here, you know, this afternoon we go back down the road to the spot. We won't go for 3 hours this morning, we won't go for 3 hours this afternoon. We'll have a sort of gentle introduction to marketing today. Now, there won't be any classes on Australia Day, which is the 28th of January, but there will be a 3-hour, it's important to note this, there will be one 3-hour class at 2:15 on Wednesday, February the 13th. So no class at all on Australia Day, but there will be one class. That will be the last class for the semester. So that's the class when I talk about the exam and all those sorts of things. So it's probably a good one to come to. Having said that, normally what I do is I put my lecture notes in LMS prior to the lecture, so that when you can actually bring copies of them to the lecture and make notes on them and all those sorts of things. And I'll do that in that case. So that 3 hours is meant to be sort of feedback and discussion and that sort of thing. But I'll send an email around to everyone around all that. Okay, this is sort of how we're going to go through things. Now, don't frantically write all this down, because I'll put all these notes in LMS later on today or tomorrow. But this is sort of how marketing's structured, if you like. It's what we call the marketing mindset. Let me just find this and turn it on. And the marketing mindset, you know, the point that I started with, which is that marketing is about what an organisation does, is what we call the marketing mindset. And we talk about the idea of value and what that means from a consumer perspective. Value is quite an interesting concept, and as some of you know, and some people have attended, I actually teach a class called Managing for Value Creation. Value is quite an interesting idea. It's a sort of abstract idea, but it's a very sort of challenging and compelling idea. So we'll talk a little bit about that and the market-oriented firm and what it means to be market-oriented. That means organisations that understand markets, understand consumers, and respond to them. Basically what we know is that firms that are market-oriented, at this stage you won't even know what that means. But we know that market-oriented firms outperform firms that aren't by a factor of 200% to 300%, whether you're looking at revenue growth, shareholder value, or whatever it might be. These are the core concepts, and this is what we're going to go through over the next couple of hours, and a bit of Monday next week. Then we'll talk about some of the individual marketing functions. When you look at an organisation, there's an HR department, a marketing department, a manufacturing department, etc., etc. These are the sorts of things that marketing departments typically do. These are the sorts of things that marketing departments have some influence on. They might do the market research. Market analysis and planning is something that typically the firm gets involved in. Then we'll talk about this idea called co-creation, or services marketing co-creation, which is a sort of new idea in marketing and services marketing. And then there's always some ethical issues in marketing to consider, and becoming increasingly important in marketing. So, 25 minutes back into the new semester, I'm talking about assessment, but this is a very short semester, as you know. We've got basically 6 weeks, well, excluding Australia Day, and so we've sort of got five lots of 6 hours plus one 3-hour class, so I felt we should get this out early. There's a group presentation. Now, one of the things we have to do today is to try and form groups. Now, some of you may not know a single other person in this room. By the end of the day, you'll be great friends. Now, groups are quite interesting. A lot of you know at many business schools, many postgraduate studies, you're forced to do assignments in groups. Now, there's a bunch of reasons. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but the single biggest reason is that that's what you do in the workplace. Very few people work in isolation. You have to make decisions with other groups. You have to interact with other people. You have to produce outcomes together. So that's what happens in the workplace. This is a good place to practice. The other thing I should say, and it's sort of one of the interesting things about having a university that attracts a lot of students from overseas. I know often it can be hard, it can be difficult to work in groups where you don't share sort of similar cultures and similar backgrounds, similar languages and all those sorts of things. But it's an experience you may never get again in your career. And yet I suspect that there's not... You know, when I was your age, which is a fair while ago now, the single biggest dominant economic entity in the world was the United States of America. Every single one of us who got the chance to study overseas wanted to go to America. Every one of us who got the chance to work overseas went to America. The single biggest source of migration into Australia was from English-speaking countries, typically the United Kingdom and New Zealand. So the world that I lived in was an English-speaking world. Now, 20 years ago, I heard Rupert Murdoch saying that if you were brought up speaking English, you were one of the luckiest people in the world. Only 20 years ago. Now, the fact that Rupert Murdoch sells more papers to Chinese language people than English-speaking people these days would indicate some of the changes in his thinking. You're going to work in a very different world. Which economies do you think are going to dominate the world in which you live? The world in which you're going to have your careers? Which languages do you think will dominate? Which beliefs and cultures do you think will dominate? Now, I know not all of you are from Australia, but which two countries do you think are now the biggest source of migrants to Australia? You all knew it was India as number one, and you all knew it was China as number two. Those two countries make up 40% of all migration into Australia. So even if you have no plans to go and work in India or go and work in China, you still want to go and work in America or wherever it might be, you've got people from those countries who are coming to Australia. Something like 50% of all Victorian households, and Victoria is a slow growth state in immigration terms, come from about 50% of Victorian households have an adult who was born overseas or have a parent who was born overseas. So we're living in a world of very rapidly changing sort of socio-demographics, socio-economics. So that's a very long way of saying there are some advantages in getting exposure to other languages, other cultures, other systems of belief by practicing here by doing group assignments. Now, it may not be the way to maximise the best possible mark, because it is hard working in groups. You know, when I was doing my MBA, which is a long time ago, we had to do everything in groups. We had to do case studies every week in groups, and working with other people is, to be honest, a pain in the arse. Because you've got to organise around them, you've got to find time for them, you've got to argue with them, as opposed to just doing things yourself. But there are some advantages in doing it, which is exposure to other ideas and cultures. How many people here are here from mainland China? Okay. If I went into an office building in mainland China, and out the front was a statue of a guy holding a spear, you would all know who that was, wouldn't you? Most office buildings in China. Might be my poor description of it. Okay. This is my quick... I hate that. What I see here, statue outside lots of buildings in China? Yeah? Do you think if I was a foreigner to China, it would be important to understand who he was and why he was out the front of most buildings? Sure. Symbolism has importance in different cultures. So groups are a good way to learn some of those things. So by the end of today, we have to try and form some groups, because the first assignment is due in 3 weeks' time. Well, sorry, week 3. 2 weeks' time. First class presentation. So we've got a fair bit of organisation to do between now and then. Now, I should say, I like it in week 3 so that I've got time to give you feedback. So if people struggle to make a week 3 deadline, I don't mind, but it just reduces the amount of time we have available. You know, this is a very compressed semester. I think there's a week between the end of the semester and the exam. But it's important that I try and give you feedback. And there's 2 streams, so there's about 120 students doing this class, so I've got a lot of work to do to give you all some feedback, so I need the time to do that. Anyway, we'll sort of work on that, on forming some groups during the course of the morning. This is a whole lot of background about me, which you may or may not find interesting. I wrote a lot of it because I find myself very interesting, like most people. Sorry, it doesn't mean everyone finds me interesting. Like most people, I find myself interesting. But I've got been fortunate enough to have a career in different industries, you know, sport, telecommunications, investment banking. I've worked at a number of major universities here, Berkeley in the US, Cambridge in the UK, run my own businesses, etc., etc. So, now, this is a one-page, you know, I spoke about the assignment. This is I've sort of called this a quick background, a case analysis in marketing. But this is sort of a useful way to think about marketing problems, which is what, when we look at the assignments, that's sort of what they're about. You know, we're looking at organisations and saying, you know, are they effective in the way in which they manage their marketing? And the first way to think about that is, who's the consumer? Who are they trying to market to? So, we know, for example, that you know, different types of retailers market to different types of consumers. If there are different types of consumers, they value things differently. And we'll spend a bit more time this morning talking about how people value things and this idea of value. And people behave differently. Let me give you an example. So who was... You were a Coke... Sorry, what's your name? Anya. Sorry? Anya. Okay, Anya's a Coca-Cola drinker. If I said to you, Anya, I can supply you Coca-Cola, it's perfectly legitimate Coca-Cola, it's fresh off the factory floor, it's properly branded, it's the legitimate stuff at $1 a can, could I have all of your Coca-Cola business?
$1 a can?
Yeah.
Probably is.
Yeah, sure, why not? I'm trustworthy. Now, if I said, now the only problem is, you've got to turn up to a factory in Dandenong, which is 25 kilometres away, at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you can only buy one can at a time, but I'll sell it to you for 50 cents a can. Would you buy it? No. So the products remain the same, the offer has remained different. The offer is different. So Anya values that offer differently. And that's basically what consumers do. They value different offers differently. So when we talk about, you know, what do people value, we'll be talking about how do consumers evaluate different things that are offered to them through marketing. But often when you look at an organisation, they make some assumptions about what consumers value, and those assumptions sort of don't stand up to test. So this idea of how do people behave. Now, Anya's just given two examples of she would behave differently in the case of two different offers, which is quite normal in what people do. We'll look at competitors and industries and organisational capabilities. So we'll do that this afternoon. But then we talk about this thing called the Marketer's Toolkit, and that goes back to all this sort of stuff. So quite often when people look at marketing, they look at advertising, they look at promotion, they look at the product, they look at branding, but that's not enough. We've got to understand the context, both in terms of competitors, the industry we compete in, and the consumers that we're trying to serve, to evaluate how whether those things are effective or not. So that's a very quick introduction to case studies. So what do we want to do today? Well, first of all, we want to understand a little bit about what marketing means in 2013. Actually, what marketing means in 2013 is probably different to what it meant in 2010. It's a very rapidly evolving discipline. Certainly different to what it was, you know, in the 60s and 70s and so on. We want to talk about the marketing-oriented firm because that's the top layer of the diagram I outlined before. What does it mean for a firm to be marketing-oriented? How do they achieve market orientation? What are the benefits of doing it? We want to introduce the idea of the marketing toolkit. You know, what are the things that you have to influence consumers? And provide a framework for understanding customer value creation. So this is a very... You'll find in your textbook that there's various definitions of marketing. This is the one from the American Marketing Association, which I wrote in 2007. The American Marketing Association is a very complex organisation. It's made up of professional marketers, academics, people from the American government, etc., etc. But basically they talk about marketing is the activity, institutions and processes for creating, communicating, delivering and exchanging offers that have value for customers, clients, partners and society at large. Anyone here understand what that means? Don't worry about learning it, or memorising it. But basically what that says is that the core function of marketing is this idea of creating value. So this is all the things that go into creating value, and the things that have value for customers, clients, partners and society at large. So to give you an example, if we went back 5 years, what was the biggest selling handset brand in the world 5 years ago? Sorry? Nokia, yeah. A report I read over the weekend said that Nokia is probably likely to be the world's single biggest bankruptcy in 2013. So in 5 years they've gone from being the dominant brand in handsets. Now this is just an analyst who writes for the Wall Street Journals, and they're doing one of those sort of controversial, get a lot of publicity articles that journalists write over the summer break, and basically saying we think the biggest bankruptcy will be Nokia. Now, how does a firm go from being the most dominant brand in a incredibly rapidly growing industry? I mean, in many, many countries around the world, there are more handsets than people. Well, sorry, there are more handsets than adults, I guess, which shows a lot of kids have got them, but also a lot of people have got multiple handsets. So how does an organisation go from being such a dominant brand to being on the edge of bankruptcy? This isn't a tough question. Yeah. People don't buy the product. That was tough, wasn't it? How come they don't sell as much? Because people stop buying it. Don't sell as much? Okay, say after me. People don't buy it. They're not selling as much. People aren't buying it. Don't sell as much. People are not buying it. Why don't people buy it? How many... No, I shouldn't ask a question. How many people here, if they were thinking about... And we all buy phones for different reasons. One of the IT companies I'm involved with has a big interest in video products. So I don't use Apple products. Why don't I use Apple products? They can't play flash video, which is half the video on the net. So I use Android products. So I've got a very particular reason for why I don't use Apple products. So I can't use an iPad, they don't play flash video. Don't use an iPad, don't use an iPhone. Use Android. But how many people here would think about buying a Nokia if they were thinking about buying a phone today? It's people like you that have sent them broke. My God, you should be ashamed of yourself. Okay, why not? Yeah, things have changed. Better graphics, better features, better support, all those sorts of things. More interesting applications. I mean, clearly one of the great things about Apple products, it's just the sheer volume of apps that you can buy for them. Now, there's 700 new apps for Apple products released every day. 700 a day. So, all those sorts of things. So, people like Nokia have lost their relevance. Now, if you take Apple products, how many of you have got an iPhone? This isn't a trick question. You should know if you've got an iPhone or not. Do you know which part of that iPhone is made by Apple? Yeah, the logo. The rest of it's outsourced. So they've done a fantastic job of organising all of these activities, institutions, processes for creating, communicating, delivering and exchanging offers that have value for customers, clients, partners and society at large. That's what Apple have done an incredibly good job at. Now, the fact that they don't manufacture it themselves, who cares? It's got their brand on it, they stand behind it. It's their design, the whole structure of Apple. I mean, when Steve Jobs first started with the iPod, what did he do that was different? I mean, it was just another MP3 player, as far as a lot of people are concerned. What did he do differently? Ah, you're all too young. He made music accessible. iTunes. iTunes was the key to success for the iPod. You could buy songs, one at a time and download them, put it, so you could actually create your own playlist. That was the single biggest feature of the iPod that no one else offered. So that's once again all these institutions, activities. Now, where do you get music from? That's Napster, BitTorrent. No, where do you get it from legally? Sorry, this is a very distinguished university. I shouldn't ask those questions. I was using some software the other day, and my 15-year-old daughter was watching me use it, and she said, "Where'd you get that from?" And I said, "I bought it." She looked at me like I was an idiot. What do you mean you bought it? Anyway, so where do you get music from? Music publishers. EMI and whole range of, Warner Brothers and Disney and a whole load of people have music. And Steve Jobs was the first person to come to them and say, "I've got a different distribution model. You can sell it you can either keep on worrying about pirated videos and, people basically transferring them from DVD, putting them on the net and making them free, or I can sell them at about $1 each. And people can buy them legally." That was the model. So once again, he didn't create the music, he created the channel, and the channel was, the iPod was the end of it. So all these things are what he pulled together to make Apple successful. Now, one of the things that one of my favourite companies in the world is Walmart. How many people here have heard of Walmart? Is there anyone who's not heard of Walmart? Okay. Walmart is like a giant... they sell just about everything these days, but it's a bit like a giant Kmart. It's like a sort of Kmart on steroids, I suppose. Because there's a whole lot of things you can buy there that is different. It's more than what a Kmart has offered. So you can buy hardware products, you can buy fashion products, you can buy just about anything there. But they're a really interesting story. Walmart is the biggest organisation in the world. Walmart turns over $500 billion a year. Now, that's interesting, I think, because Walmart was started 50 years ago by a guy called Sam Walton, and he had one store in a little town called Bentonville, Arkansas. Any of you ever seen those American movies where someone's on the run from the police and they stay in those little crummy motels with the air conditioner stuck in the window? That would be a luxury 5-star hotel in Bentonville, Arkansas. It's a dump, basically. Town of 13,000 people, tiny town. And Bentonville, Arkansas, Arkansas's only other claim to fame is it's where Bill Clinton came from. And Arkansas has the lowest rate of high school completion of any state in America except Mississippi. It has the highest rate of unemployment, has had for years and years and years, has sort of deep-seated examples of racial prejudice. It's not exactly an economic dynamo. And Sam Walton built it up from that company to the world's biggest company. It turns over $500 billion. I can't even conceptualise how much that is. And they've always worked on the same model, which is this: everyday low pricing. Now, what does that mean for Walmart? It's funny how you often find examples of people who have taken a very old idea and made it successful. Like the guy who invented magnetic dusters. Okay, for those of you who are studying finance or have studied finance in the past, forgive my very simplistic example, but this is a very simplistic example. You think about something like return on assets. For those of you who haven't studied finance, when you invest in something, you want to get some money back for it. Now, typically, you want to get more money back than you would get if you put it in a bank account or something like that. So, return on assets is a measure of financial returns. So, ROA equals in a very simple way. I mean, it's, those who've done finance know it can be expressed much more in a much more detailed way than that. So profit and assets. Now another way of writing that is I wasn't very good at maths at school, but I know that they're equivalent equations because you can just take those out and they're equivalent. Now, what does profit over sales measure? It measures your profit margin. And sales over assets measures your turnover. Very simple approach. Now, what sets your margin? Now, your costs, obviously, how much it costs you to get the goods that you sell. But in the end, your margin is very largely affected by price. What factors affect the price that you can sell a product for? Well, there's only two, really. Competition, absolutely. And people's willingness to pay. So are people willing to pay the price, and do competitors offer a different price? So by and large, Walmart argue that they don't have a lot of control over margin. That's set by external forces. So they work on controlling their turnover. Now, for them, managing their turnover is a marketing function, because what they're offering is everyday low pricing. They have some sales, but what they say is you come and buy here, day in, day out, will be the cheapest place to buy. They can't manage the margin, even though they're talking about cheap. They're managing the turnover. So because margins are determined by competitor, they manage their working capital. So they have a very cost-focused culture. So if you go to a Walmart, it is like going to a Kmart. There aren't lots of people serving in the store, but they'll help you. They'll certainly help you if you ask. But the culture of the organisation isn't about sort of great service or great product. It's all about great cost savings and what the employees do there to save money and to get cost out of the system. They've completely redesigned purchase arrangements with suppliers. So what does that mean? Can you imagine what it's like? Anyone here ever worked in the retail industry? If you're a retailer, where is most of your money tied up? In your inventory. Yeah, the product you're going to sell. Walmart turn over $500 billion a year and don't own their own stock. Imagine having your own store where you don't have to pay for your stock. Well, they have $500 billion worth of stock. Well, $400 billion plus their margin. But they don't stock. Basically, they say to their suppliers, you own it until we sell it. And because they've become so big, they can do that. Now, many of their suppliers have made a lot of money out of Walmart over a long time. But they are notorious for driving a hard bargain with their suppliers. But they'll also have long-term arrangements with you. And they have incredible ability to forecast. And one of the great stories I heard about them, I was told this by a guy who works for Warner Brothers, that there's a 3-hour time difference between New York and LA. So if there's a new DVD, for example, going on sale typically on a Tuesday in New York, the latest Pirates of the Caribbean movie or something like that, they'll have hourly sales targets that product should hit. And if it doesn't hit the hourly sales targets, they'll ring Warner Brothers before the stores open in LA and say, you're not hitting the sales target, you need to give us a bigger discount on the product that's already at the store in LA, or we'll send it back. So that they can be pretty ruthless with their suppliers, but that's the offer they make, everyday low pricing. So their thinking is dominated by the offer they make to their customers, which is everyday low pricing. So when we talk about marketing being everything that organisations do, Walmart are tough on their suppliers. They have incredible forecasting capability. They have this amazing ability to manage their working capital. I've written down there the DuPont. Oops, my battery's gone flat already. The DuPont formula, which is what that equation is that I wrote there before. The DuPont formula was originated in 1916. So it's hardly a new idea, but Walmart have taken it to a whole new level to become successful. Because for them, their whole business is focused around this value idea. And of course, Walmart's also been one of the great companies to invest in if you're a shareholder. So the idea of everyday low pricing sounds simple. This is the sort of Walmart model of how they get their pricing down. And you'll see that what technology they use, how they position their brand, what sort of features they have in their products, the sort of targets they have, employees. The one issue that has created a lot of concern about Walmart is they're currently being sued by their own employees for being underpaid. That's a really big black mark against Walmart because they've always been a very community-minded organisation and employed a lot of people in their local town. So when I think about this idea of marketing being everything, there's not a single part of that you could change and still deliver that offer to consumers, which is everyday low pricing. So that's the sort of... So when we talk about marketing-oriented firms and that sort of thing, that's really what we're talking about. One of the great thinkers about management, probably the very first academic involved in the study of management was a guy called Peter Drucker. Before that, it was Drucker started writing in the mid-1940s, and he was the first person to study management as an academic discipline. Before that, it was mainly economists who wrote about management. And he sort of said two things. The first thing he said is that the purpose of a business is to serve a customer. Basically, the idea we spoke about before. If you don't serve a customer, you're not getting revenue from customers, you don't have a business. If you can't find a way to get customers to transact with you, then you don't have a business. So the purpose of a business is to serve a customer, and marketing is not a specified activity. It's a whole business seen from the point of view of its final result, that is from the customer's point of view. Now, he said that in about 1950, and I think it's probably as true today as it was then. I should just clarify, I'm not saying that in an organisation the marketing department has to be the dominant department in an organisation. What I'm saying is that the idea of the customer has to be the dominant idea if an organisation is going to compete successfully. And that is what we mean when we say marketing is an organisation-wide responsibility. So some of the stages of evolution in marketing. The first one was called the production era. Production era, the best known example of the production era is Henry Ford. Very strange man, Henry Ford, but he was very good at making cars cheaply. Anyone ever heard a famous quote about customers can have any colour they want as long as it's black? When Henry Ford started producing Ford cars, they made one model and they were black. Why would people buy them? No other choice, yep.
They made the black as good to look.
Oh, they didn't buy black. They were cheap. Because of mass production techniques, which is why it was called the production era, cars suddenly became affordable. So for most American families, European families, cars had not been affordable, and all of a sudden went through mass production tech, because cars were sort of handmade. There's still some cars that are handmade. But all of a sudden cars became affordable. So the average person could aspire to own a car, literally because of Henry Ford and the development of production line efficiency. So when Henry Ford said you can have any colour you want as long as it's black, people didn't care because they could pay whatever it was, $150 or something and get one. That was followed by what's referred to as the sales era. So Henry Ford started sort of early 20th century, 1916, 1917, somewhere around there. The sales era was an era sort of dominated by the idea that we can push products at people. Now, what you've got to bear in mind is there were two things happening that made this more possible. It's funny to sort of think about it now. Funny that 90 years ago, I think 1920s, 90 years ago, if you were, this is a sort of an American idea, I guess. If you were in an American household 90 years ago, anywhere in America, living out in the Midwest or what have you, what was the iPod of the day? What did you suddenly have access to that you hadn't had access to previously in human history? Not quite. Radio. All of a sudden, you could turn on the radio. Now, what does radio do? It connects you with the rest of the world. You get the news, you get broadcasters, you get information. What else do you get? You get advertising. Someone's got to pay for all that radio. So it was called the sales era because there were a couple of, the idea of mail order catalogues. There'd been this famous Sears catalogue for many years, but mass media through radio, through print, huge growth in newspapers, massive growth in mail order catalogues, massive growth, funnily enough, in door-to-door salespeople. Now, it's not that long ago that people used to basically walk the streets of America knocking on doors selling stuff. In fact, in many places, they still do. So this was, as we got there, the sales era, that basically it was a very simple idea that if you push something at someone hard enough and often enough, they'll buy it. Anything from a car to a TV to a dog or a cat. Then probably the 1950s became the marketing department era. Now, the 1950s is sort of an interesting time because the 1950s was one of the great economic booms, particularly in Western societies, the post-World War II reconstruction. There was also a massive boom in education. A lot of people who came back from the war had access to education. They were given access to universities and what have you. Now, in Western countries in the 1950s and 1960s, the general public didn't have access to education. Education was reserved for people who could afford to pay very, very high fees. So most people didn't have access to education. People who came back from the war did. So you got people with education, you got an economic boom. So there's competition for consumers. And it's around that time that the idea of brands started to emerge. So the idea of a marketing department. How do we manage advertising? How do we manage the sales function? How do we manage brands? How do we price things in the right way? All those things that we spoke about before in relation to the marketing toolkit. And finally, where we are now, which is the marketing organisation era, which is what I spoke about earlier, which is how do organisations manage marketing? How do organisations manage the link with consumers? This is I sometimes look at this slide, and for someone who's spent their life in marketing, it never ceases to surprise me, I guess. This is a study done by McKinsey's. You'll see I use quite a lot of stuff from people like McKinsey's, the Boston Consulting Group. I use academic stuff as well, but I like McKinsey's and Boston Consulting Group stuff because firstly they're high quality organisations that are generous enough to publish their materials, but it's usually quite relevant and has some interesting managerial implications. So the question they were asking is whether organisations have a centralised corporate marketing function. So there's basically a head office corporate marketing function. Now, why would that be important, do you think? I mean, you can basically, you take a global organisation, any global organisation. Take the Mars Corporation, sell Mars bars and other chocolate stuff all over the world. They would have sales and marketing functions in every one of their offices around the world. You've got one here in Melbourne and down in St Kilda Road. But they also have a central office, like a head office marketing function. Why would this question of whether there's a central marketing function be important, do you think? I'm sorry? It can be distribution. It can be. Basically, it's an issue of, do these organisations have a central office that acts as the hub of a network? So sometimes it's about control. You know, head office tells you what to do, but sometimes it's about head office saying, well, here's a good idea happening in, I don't know, Bangalore. Why don't we make sure that people in London know about it as well? So increasingly marketing is about the distribution of ideas as much as it is about the distribution of orders and instructions. Some is to do with branding. Now, if you're Coca-Cola, you want to make sure that your brand looks the same if it's in, you know, Abu Dhabi as if it's in you know, Sao Paulo. So there's some of those sorts of things. But so they found that about 80% of organisations that they spoke to, this is the 20 leading US consumer goods companies, and they spoke to the chief marketing officers. 80% of them had a central marketing function, but what they found was quite interesting. The difference between the high-performing organisations and the lesser-performing organisations. So the high-performing organisations, one of their principal functions was disseminating information about good practice. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about marketing-oriented organisations. In the high-performing organisations, branding and innovation wasn't managed centrally, it was managed locally. And increasingly, they tended less to provide marketing services. So they didn't provide market research services, advertising services, brand management services. They spent most of their time talking about good practice as opposed to doing functional things. So basically the high-performing organisations are saying, well, the local marketing organisations can do the functional marketing things, we will do the best practice strategic things. And that's quite an important difference. If you were running a global brand, why do you think you would want to do the strategic stuff and you'd leave the innovation and marketing and the sort of fundamental marketing activities of, you know, branding, advertising, pricing, sales to people locally? If you looked at most of the leading, actually I'll show you next week, if you looked at most organisations, particularly consumer organisations, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, which I know isn't purely a consumer organisation, Google, Apple, Facebook, what's their single most valuable asset? Well, let me put this another way. Does anyone know what Amazon's worth? If you had to go and buy Amazon on the stock exchange. Anyone know what Amazon's worth?
Secure.
Sorry?
Secure for transaction.
Sorry, I can't quite hear.
Secure transaction. Business transaction.
Yeah, but how much, if you had to buy them, how much it would cost you to buy Amazon if you wanted to buy all of their shares that were available through the stock market? It cost you about $60 billion. That's a lot of money. I'd notice it if it fell out of my bank account.